Greetings, everybody. I'm Tobin Krieg, and on behalf of Tuck, I'd like to thank Pat for that great keynote, and thank you all for joining. Welcome to the panel on aquaculture investing. Today, we are joined by Joe Powers, Principal at Maine Venture Fund, Gray Harris, Senior Vice President of Food Systems at Coastal Enterprises, Maggie Freed, Head of Ocean and Aquaculture Investor Consortium at the CREO Syndicate, and Donna Hazard, board member and general partner at SeaAhead. We have an extraordinary panel today. I'm super excited. This whole summit is all about ag tech innovation. And so today we're going to dive kind of into the details about the aquaculture space. In the last couple of decades, we've seen some impressive transformation in aquaculture, particularly the increasing emergence of entrepreneurs, exciting new technologies, and growing consumer awareness and demand. And of course, the increase of capital available to support these great aquaculture startups. So we're going to dig into some of these complex topics around aquaculture investing. I will direct questions to the participants as we're in this Zoom context. And lastly, I'd like to ask the audience participants to pose any questions through the Crowdcast platform, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end to respond to them or weave them in throughout. So let's just kick things off by having all the panelists give kind of a brief intro of themselves and their firms. So let's do Joe and Gray, and then Maggie and Donna.
All right, thanks, Tobin. And hello, everybody. Nice to see you. I'm a proud T14, so honored to be here. As Tobin says, Joe Powers. I work with Maine Venture Fund, which is a state-sponsored fund focused on growing companies in Maine that have the potential for high growth and public benefit. And so we're a generalist fund. We're an early stage fund. We invest across industries, but we do have a concentration of aquaculture companies, and I'll be talking a little bit more about some of those.
Great, thanks, Joe. My name is Gray Harris. It's great to be here. I'm Senior Vice President of Food Systems at CEI, Coastal Enterprises. We're a community development financial institution in Maine, and we've been investing in the working waterfront for the past 43 years in a variety of capacities. Through a lot of lending and a lot of investing, and in particular over the past 10 years, where we've seen aquaculture really take off on our coastline. So I'm thrilled to be here. I work closely with my colleague Joe at the Maine Venture Fund, and certainly in touch with the SeaAhead folks, and it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Gray. I'm Maggie Freed, and I am the head of the Ocean Seafood and Aquaculture Investor Consortium at CREO Syndicate. CREO is a network of family offices and aligned funds that are investing into solutions to combating climate change, as well as sustainability. Within that, I work with a group of investors who are investing in sustainable oceans, aquaculture, and seafood, and I work with them to provide aligned deal flow, research, and investor expertise, with the goal that over a 3-year period, this group will invest $250 million into these sectors.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Donna Hazard. I'm a general partner at SeaAhead. We are a blue tech hub based in Boston. We support innovation, growing ventures, and also measures to make existing ocean-related industry more sustainable. We run an incubator in partnership with the New England Aquarium. The incubator is for very early stage companies, provides a combination of curriculum and mentorship and introductions to potential partners and customers. We have a platform for startup companies through which they access all kinds of resources, financial, mentoring, again, connections to industry. We run an angel investor group called the Blue Angels, and we also do a fair amount of advisory work with academic and research institutions, with family offices and foundations, and with corporations active in the blue tech space. So really look forward to talking to you about this topic tonight.
Awesome. Excited to have all of you here. So without further ado, let's jump in. Just to kind of set the stage for us here, it would be great to introduce the aquaculture space. The first thing that many people think about when they hear aquaculture is salmon farming or shrimp farming, but the space is pretty complex. So can you guys give us a little bit of a brief walkthrough of aquaculture? And if you have any examples of startups or maybe technologies, that'd be great as well. And let's start with Donna and then go to Gray.
Okay. Well, I know my fellow panelists know aquaculture inside and out, and I'm sure many other people in the room do as well. But let me just touch on it for those who are newer to the field. I do think people think about salmon first when they think of aquaculture. And the fact is that finfish aquaculture is a huge area of investment and of future growth. Of course, there are other finfish that are also farmed. Those include bluefin tuna developments are underway, eel, carp, tilapia. I'm mostly focused on the marine species, but freshwater and marine aquaculture is huge. Shellfish aquaculture is a place where we're seeing a lot of innovation as well. Oysters, clams, mussels, shrimp, really a lot of activity there. And then seaweed, I mentioned last, but it's certainly not least. So much work in the area of cultivating, harvesting, processing, developing new markets. Another way to kind of cut the aquaculture field is to look at on land versus coastal versus offshore versus even deep sea. Aquaculture is active and under development in all those spaces. And yet I think the most exciting thing is to look at the explosion in technologies that are being developed to support aquaculture or being transferred from other industries into aquaculture in order to increase efficiency, to decrease negative environmental impacts. And just to touch really quickly, so we can move on to somebody else, but we see companies representing hardware, robotics, autonomous underwater and surface vehicles, sensors, imaging, augmented and virtual reality. We see information tech, analytics, digitization, artificial intelligence. We see clean tech plays that apply to aquaculture, whether that's renewable energy to support operations or clean transport to support monitoring and maintenance, or recirculating technologies that are lower power as well, environmentally friendly chemicals, environmentally friendly materials, and bio-based solutions as well, whether those are genetics or development of new nutrients. So and we can talk about companies that represent all of those, but I'll stop there so someone else can take it the rest of the way.
Thanks, Donna. And all I'll say is everything Donna said, for sure. And just sort of stepping back again, there are investors of all stripes on this call, I know, and you're probably thinking, how does my risk profile fit with this particular space? And I think there's a place for everyone, but it is really important that folks know that this is a high risk sector. It's new, it's emerging, and it's early yet. And so that's a super exciting place to be. That's why one of the reasons I love to be there. But knowing that it is farming, it's cultivating marine vegetables, it's raising marine livestock. It really is akin to land-based farming more than it is fishing, which is like hunting and gathering. And with that, there are all the attendant risks of a system that is entirely reliant on nature. Well, I say that, and we do know that there are ways to control that environment, and that's where there's some really exciting work happening. We also know there's an extraordinary amount of risk there with, we hear of these catastrophic events, which can happen in any business. But I think understanding the sector, understanding the risks involved in aquaculture specifically is really important. And to sort of just drill down on what Donna said, there's production is sort of one piece of aquaculture, and then there's technology that sort of applies to all production. And as a place-based investor that really is a community investor in the backyard, on the backyards where we work, I think, a way to think about aquaculture is really preserving and maintaining iconic heritage industries that have generational legacies. And how do we bring those into 21st century? So there's really a strong mission component also with aquaculture that I think needs to be part of any investor profile and wants to get into this space.
Awesome. I guess kind of building on that, I have a little bit of a two-part question. Donna mentioned a number of kind of technologies, and Gray alluded to kind of some emerging spaces as aquaculture is still growing. So I'm curious, either from your experiences or kind of general observations about market dynamics, are there any trends you've noticed in aquaculture or ocean sustainability that you find really interesting and that are kind of growing rapidly? And I guess if there are any technologies that kind of exemplify that, that could be helpful as well. So Maggie, you want to kick us off and then we'll go to Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think to what Donna was saying earlier, there's so many exciting things that are happening, and we could have multiple calls on all the exciting things that are happening, but I'll just point to three of them. So first of all, a trend that I'm seeing is around alternative feed ingredients. And many of you may know this, but some of you may not, which is that aquaculture feed was traditionally made from wild capture fish, which continues to perpetuate the system of pulling from the ocean and diminishing its resources. So there was some initial movement to replace wild capture feed with soy. But soy is also not sustainable, and it can cause digestion problems among the fish and health issues. So there's been a number of different startups in the space around alternative feed ingredients, whether that's black soldier flies, whether that's algae, there's a number of others. But I think within that, the trend that's really exciting is to hear from major feed companies that are working with these startups and incorporating this alternative feed into their ingredients, into their formulations, and also hearing from farmers that they're also trying out these feed ingredients, because it's one thing for startups to start doing in the space, but it's another thing for you to see uptake throughout the supply chain. So I think that's particularly exciting, and I think can really drive the sustainability forward of aquaculture as a whole. The second, which Donna mentioned previously, is both precision aquaculture and precision fishing. So really bringing technology into the space. And so, on the aquaculture side, that means that you have automated biomass counters, you have automated feeding, you have even vaccination of fish. Right now it's done by hand. Someone pulls all the fish out of the water and one by one vaccinates them. And so to be able to do that through feed would be an extraordinary time saver, increase efficiency, can increase fish health, can decrease costs, and make sustainable seafood much more accessible to people. And then on the wild capture side, you have technologies that can reduce bycatch and again, improve the sustainability of the space. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll just say a bit about it because I know that Joe is going to touch on this as well, is seaweed. And seaweed is really having a moment right now. And there's a number of reasons for that. I'll let Joe speak to the environmental benefits on the carbon capture side, but seaweed can be used for a number of different products that have positive environmental benefits or can replace harmful products. So it can be used in agricultural biostimulants. It can be used as protein for human consumption. It can be used for animal and fish feed. It can be used in an alternative material to plastics. It's very early stage. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, especially on the last moonshoot, which is biofuel. But there's a lot that can be done that has positive environmental benefits, and a lot of investors and companies that are moving into this space. So I'm excited about those, but I'll stop there since like I said, I could go on for quite a while.
Yeah, that's the hardest part. There's lots of exciting things going on. So if I had to narrow it down to a few myself, I would say again, we're looking at this through a Maine lens at Maine Venture Fund. And so some exciting things that are happening here in the state are on the one hand, this idea of recirculating aquaculture systems, land-based aquaculture is finally kind of gaining ground here after many years of, an industry that was about to break through, and there's a bunch of projects that are now coming forth. One of them is an eel project called American Unagi, and that's really exciting. You're not drawing down wild fisheries, and you get to bring in a lot of the technology that other panelists have talked about in terms of really dialing in the control and the efficiency of those types of operations. So really interesting to see that. Carbon sequestration, as Maggie alluded to, is really interesting. There's a company called Running Tide Technologies in Maine that is essentially sequestering carbon by growing kelp and sinking it to the deep ocean floor where it will stay. So that's a big deal, right? Because sequestering carbon is one thing, but keeping it sequestered is another. And so that's sort of an early stage project, but if that scales, that can be really meaningful. And then finally, as Gray alluded to, I think the most exciting thing for me is seeing some of the so the more heritage industries being brought into the 21st century and not just losing those or pushing those aside. So an example of that is, our lobster industry in Maine is threatened by climate change, by the warming of the Gulf of Maine. And so one of the strategies to mitigate that is to introduce an additional layer of industry for those lobstermen. So in the case of Atlantic Sea Farms, which is a portfolio company of Maine Venture Fund, the company grows edible kelp that's really delicious, but they farm it in the winter, which is the off season for kelp. And so they're working with lobstermen to extend their season and provide economic opportunity for them. So those are things that I think are exciting happening in Maine, and a bunch more that we'll dig into.
Could I add one more? Do we have time for me to add more?
Yeah.
I think digitization of the supply chain is another trend, as we see both consumers demanding traceability, but also an ever-constricting and complicated regulatory environment. Being able to trace the source all the way down to the plate is a really important, it's a market to leverage, frankly. The food safety market is a market to leverage. And again, in Maine, we're seeing Oyster Tracker, Shellfish Solutions doing that very thing, because it's going to be a sort of a non-negotiable, we think, going forward, that everybody along the supply chain, from the harvesters, the growers, the harvesters, the distributors, all the way down to the retailers, are going to need to know exactly what happened along the way, right down to temperature control. So that's a very exciting space also, I would say. Sorry, I had to jump in with that.
No, that's awesome. I guess to kind of explore this a little further, you mentioned some exciting innovations from, Gray just mentioned digitization to carbon capture to alternative feedstocks. That's a wide range of different ideas and solutions. And so I'm curious, where are you seeing these aquaculture startups coming from? Are there specific geographies or types of organizations that are the primary drivers for these new aquaculture entrepreneurs? And I guess let's kick it over to Donna to get us going.
Oh God, my quick answer is everywhere, really every kind of background. But the ones that come to mind first for me, first practitioners. For example, we see shellfish farmers who know exactly where the challenges lie, exactly where their obstacles are to getting to market or to improving efficiency in their operations. And they are innovating, or they're working with partners to innovate and offer solutions that really bring value. So that is certainly one place that's very exciting, because those ideas are so grounded in reality. I would say the second place we're seeing, and I'm drawing on, I'm thinking back to our incubator, people applying to the incubator, and also to the companies that are applying to our angel investor group. We're seeing a lot of computer scientists and engineers, whether those are recent grads or 45-year-olds who have been practicing in a different industry and have decided that they not only want to build a highly valued business with a big exit, but they really want to make the world a better place. And they have been thinking about what problem they can apply their skills to solve challenge. And aquaculture offers all of that. And so we see partnerships with between people with those really strong STEM, particularly engineering, computer science backgrounds, and others. But the other category I can't leave out is we see a lot of idealistic generalists, I'm going to say, people who have huge entrepreneurial drive, care a lot about the environment, really want to make a difference, maybe are drawn to a particular problem out there, whether it's plastics or something else. And I would say some of our best opportunities have come from people whose primary qualification is passion and a real commitment to building a business that addresses a major challenge. And what we've seen is that it turns out that those entrepreneurs also turn out to be super compelling, inspirational, hardworking, very quick studies. And so as long as they are coupled with the right supporting environment, access to the right resources and the right mentors and funding, their opportunities are ones that investors should really pay attention to. So those are three to start us off.
Yeah, and I'll build on that by saying that I've spoken just in the last week to investors or people partnering with a number of countries on developing solutions around oceans and aquaculture from the Caribbean, Europe, the Middle East. And there's definitely a lot of innovation and incubation happening there. And then also I see companies that spin out of major companies. And sometimes they're companies you wouldn't expect, companies that spin out of Lockheed Martin, that spin out of Google. In the recirculating aquaculture space, you have companies who have moved into the space who might have worked previously in wastewater management, but realize that work applies to recirculating aquaculture. And so they either add some work into that sector or they shift into the aquaculture space. So it's been exciting to see companies come from those areas as well as the ones that Donna mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to sort of round that out, to say, the entrepreneurial pipeline builders is where we're seeing a lot of that. So CEI's been a leader in the Aquaculture and Shared Waters program. It's a 12-week curriculum. 263 people have gone through that program, that aquaculture training program in the past 8 years. And many of them are from the marine industry already. So the marine industry itself, here we have an incredibly skilled workforce who are, some of them already have the equipment, already have the gear. They just need the training to get rolling. And that's really exciting, like Atlantic Sea Farm, for instance, where lobstermen and women are finding that there's complementary, income diversifying activities that they can do on the water, like raising kelp.
Awesome. So I'd like to shift gears a little bit from kind of the broader aquaculture trends and context to getting into the details around, just getting capital into the hands of great entrepreneurs. And so when you are considering investing in an aquaculture firm, what are the most important factors that you look for? How do you evaluate kind of the financial and impact potential of a firm? And I guess we're on a roll starting with Donna, so let's just have her kick it off again.
So I think that in terms of assessing the financial side of the equation, I think the process we go through is quite comparable to the framework you would apply to other types of businesses. The team, value proposition at each stage of the supply chain, IP, differentiation, novelty, anything that conveys a competitive advantage. Of course, we look closely at the financials, cash flow, path to profitability, and then the terms, potential exits, and likely return. But what is different here for me, I think there are two things that come to mind immediately. One is biology. So many of these are biologically based businesses, and really going back to what Grace said in the beginning, that carries a whole different kind of risk, and also a lot of practical considerations. If you're going to try to farm bluefin tuna, it's not going to work if you've got them swimming in circles in a super small facility. They are not going to stay healthy. And that has capital implications. They're just realities of what a species needs to be taken into account. And we see a fair number of pitch decks that really don't factor that in sufficiently. And we find that tapping experts in the field is really helpful to get our arms around what the practical constraints are. Now, the beauty of innovation is that there are people figuring out how to get around those constraints, but that's the gamble we make, is whether this new approach is really going to deliver results or success in a place where that's been difficult in the past. Also, and this also goes back to something Grace said in the beginning, these are new sectors. So, they're often first in class. There aren't a lot of comparables out there to use in, assessing value or likely exit value. And so it's a little more creative process maybe than it might be in an industry where there's a very long track record. And we find that to be part of the fun, but it does make the benchmarking more difficult. And then I guess just a few thoughts on the last part of your question, which I think was, how do you measure impact? And SeaAhead is a benefit corp, so our mission is ocean health and supporting ocean health, as well as fast-growing, profitable businesses. And how we measure potential impact really varies so dramatically from business to business. Whether that's reduction in CO2 emissions is one measure we have looked at for a number of potential investments. Looking at reduction in environmental degradation, that's another one. Impacts on habitat and marine life. Impacts on depletion in wild fish stocks, et cetera. So I guess I would say we really do try to, if not get down to the last decimal place, at least get a sense of whether this is a potentially huge impact, transformational business, or whether it's going to make an incremental contribution to ocean health. And the way we do that varies dramatically.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback on that. I would agree with all of that. I think, as a generalist fund, we don't approach our aquaculture investments any differently fundamentally, and so that means, yes, team, product, market is really are the primary things, but where you spend more time, I think, on balance with an aquaculture company is that product and market, right? Where as Donna suggests, there's maybe less precedent, or the industries or the business models are a little bit more nascent. And I would say, the U.S. is behind globally on aquaculture. So there are some useful comparisons in Asia and in Europe, Chile. There are other Japan. There are other countries that are further ahead and are kind of have forged the path. But it's always different, right? When you're pioneering something domestically, and it always comes together a little bit differently. So those comps are only so useful. Evaluating impact, I agree. I think it's for the same reasons. It's tough to think about, exit and what things are going to look like down the road. But what we're measuring as an impact fund, we're measuring obviously, what the exit looks like, so we can return financially to the fund and recycle to other Maine companies, but also we're looking at regionally, where is this taking place? In the case of Atlantic Sea Farms, to return to that example, obviously a lot of benefits for the public, which is our mandate. So clean air, clean water, and then the socioeconomic benefits of serving an underserved population in that heritage industry. So lots of good spin-off effects.
Great. And let me just sort of piggyback on the piggybacking here to say it is all about the team, and you need a really good mix of production expertise and MBAs, but not all one and the other. And then if you're really bringing a new or novel product to market, it's really helpful to have someone with culinary experience on board, especially as you're trying to as you need to communicate and message that to consumers. If you're really trying to bring a new product to market, which a lot of this is, Atlantic Sea Farm Seachi is a seaweed kimchi. It's kind of out there for folks. And so how do you message that and make sure you get consumer buy-in so that, it'll be successful? We definitely look at the supply chain impacts also, like Atlantic Sea Farms that's working with 24 lobster fishermen and women, or American Unagi that has a partnership agreement with one of the 5 main tribes of Maine. And that's, those are significant impacts. We absolutely look at job creation, and not just like what jobs are created within the company and along the supply chain, but also what's the quality of those jobs. Are they good jobs with livable wages? Is there room for growth and improvement? Are there benefits? All of that. And that's a huge metric for us in the impact space.
Excellent. Great. It's good to hear MBAs are still valuable. That's always good.
Yeah.
Awesome. So to kind of keep moving along the investing process and assume that you found the great startup and you've decided to invest in it, it's gone through all those hoops. Let's kind of fast forward to supporting the company. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest obstacles that aquaculture firms face, either kind of at the product market fit stage or the growth stage? And what have you seen work to overcome those obstacles? And let's go back to Greg.
Great. Thanks, Tobin. I'll actually start with something that maybe doesn't come immediately to mind for folks, in particular, or specifically for production aquaculture. And that's the place-based issues. You would think, oh, I'd love to have an oyster farmer as my neighbor. I'd love to have a really cool, RAS facility growing out salmon. I will tell you, some of the biggest obstacles for these producers are their neighbors and the communities in which they're situated. So we tell people, give them product early and often. You want them to buy into what you're making. You want them to love those oysters that you're pulling out of there, and really building the community relationships with the towns, with the people who live in there is the difference between being able to get off the ground and not. I mean, just very, very plain and simple. Kind of alongside of that, this is in the realm of economic development, right? These projects take longer than you ever would think possible sometimes, and more money than you would actually think possible to fully capitalize these projects. So that's finding the right kind of money at the right time, right kind of financing at the right time for these early high risk aquaculture businesses is an obstacle. But also navigating the regulatory environment and all the environmental hurdles that go along with that. So you really want to make friends with your Department of Marine Resources and your inspectors, get really great communication going with them. I think, all of the things we look at when we look at investing, all the financial and operational and management and market, all of those are the flip side of those they're all obstacles. They all present some form of obstacle in one way or the other. If you're producing, do you have the space, the capacity in your facility to actually produce to meet your projections? Are you going to outgrow that space? Do you have a sustainable source for feed in supply? Either through your supply chain partners or just from just your supply chain businesses. So those are huge too. And then market acceptance of products. I love kelp cubes in my smoothie, but we have a lot of work to do to get everybody on board with kelp cubes in smoothies. And I'll say, just to overcome those obstacles is, as an investor, you really are invested in this company. So you really want to, you want to be a trusted advisor. You really want to be close and stick with them. And that's sort of the first job. And then technical assistance, what we call TA, has been critically important for every single company we've ever invested in. And so that's business resources. Some of them are free, some of them aren't, but all of them are really sort of out of the day-to-day, of just the entrepreneur or entrepreneurs trying to run their businesses. So being able to come forward to say, hey, I think you really should talk to so-and-so about, this particular market channel and how you access it and how you communicate it. Bringing those kind of resources to bear has made a world of difference for our entrepreneurs in aquaculture.
Yeah, so great hit a lot of really great points there. I would just emphasize one and add another, and I would emphasize the sort of customer behavior piece. I mean, obviously, fish is nothing new, but a lot of the products that we're talking about are new, at least as far as people's sort of pattern buying behavior. So, in the case of one company that is a newer addition to our portfolio company called Gulf of Maine Sashimi, they identified the issue that the number of species in the ocean is vast, right? The number of fish species that hits your plate is very small, and they crowd out a lot of what gets caught in the net and then can't be sold in the marketplace. So Gulf of Maine Sashimi has a special approach where they are essentially utilizing techniques in the capture and in the handling of fish such that it's sushi grade when it makes it to the plate, and it's across a bunch of different species, almost no matter what is being caught. So things like that I think are really innovative, and they face that sort of customer behavior, customer education challenge, and kelp to a lesser degree, but similar. The other thing I was going to just highlight is because a lot of this is early, companies that are really small have to vertically integrate a lot more than they otherwise would, and that's expensive. So, in the case of Atlantic Sea Farms, again, back to that example, they are harvesting spores from wild kelp stands. They're growing those out in their own nursery that they built into seed. They're putting that seed into line. They're handing that line to the fishermen who are growing the kelp. Then they're taking the kelp back. They're processing it. They're packaging it. They're doing all the front end stuff to get it to customers. So that's it's a huge lift, and a lot of it is as we've talked about, has not been done in the U.S. anyway. So I think those are just mostly a testament to the forward progress that's being made anyway, and the entrepreneurs that are forging that path. So just impressive to see.
Awesome. Taking kind of one more step through the investing process, let's assume again that this startup has overcome all of these obstacles that we've just talked about, and I guess I'd love to get your thoughts on the exit landscape and what kind of exit potential there is for said company. So I'm curious, who is acquiring aquaculture startups? Is there a large enough market of buyers? And how does this change how you think about evaluating the investment in a firm? Maggie, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so as has been pointed out a number of times throughout this discussion, aquaculture in a lot of geographies is very nascent. So we're not talking about a lot of exits that have been happening. I think there's maybe 10 years from now, we'll be seeing a lot more. But we're not seeing a lot of exits. And I think if you want to talk about exits broadly, you have to break down the value chain. So within inputs around feed or fish health, there are some major companies, Aqua, Benchmark, who have been acquiring startups. So you see some of that. In the production space, you may see vertical integration from other companies, but you do see a lot of those companies that go public. So there's a lot of public salmon companies. On the recirculating aquaculture side, Atlantic Sapphire and Kingfish Sealand have both decided to go public. So rather than be acquired, you could exit that way. And then on the processing side, what I see more often than not is buyout, distressed assets that some players will buy, and they might then vertically integrate at that point. So there's some potential, but in terms of evaluating deals, that is something that comes into play. I was talking to someone who invests in novel production systems in offshore aquaculture, and he was saying that it's really a case-by-case basis when you think about exits, that there just isn't a clear, one-path exit strategy that you can apply. So that's something where the investor may have to be really hands-on. But also, again, these are long-term investments. It's likely going to be 7 to 10 years before you exit. This isn't just a short venture, quick turnaround, you get your 20x return. So that's also something to keep in mind when you're thinking about exits.
Yeah, I guess I'll just pick up there, but only very briefly. I agree with everything Maggie said. We have only been investing for a year, so we have some step ups in value, but we don't have any exits so far in our portfolio. And, we consider the possibility of an IPO whenever we're looking at a deal. We certainly talk about the range of possible exits. I would say with most of the companies, we feel like the highest probability outcome is an acquisition of some kind by a larger player. And we do see some of the major corporates considering the nascent blue tech space as kind of an extension of their R&D arm or an alternative to in-house development. And in fact, as we've met with many of these startups and we've really pushed them on whether once they demonstrate that the opportunity they're going after is real and growing, are they simply going to be swamped out of the market by larger companies with deep pockets. And that certainly is a risk, but I think we've seen more of a pattern where they're acquired instead by the companies who want to be active in an area and have chosen to buy in successful innovators as opposed to sticking with in-house development. So that's the path we've seen the most play out so far. But check back with me in 5 years. I'll have a better answer based on experience.
I don't understand.
Awesome. I think that's a good transition. Actually, we have I think time for one more question. So I guess I'm curious, if we were to check back in with you, Donna, in 5 years, what do you think the aquaculture investing space is going to look like? How has it changed? Maybe even how should it look like? And I guess what do we need to do to get there? And maybe I'll toss it right back to you.
Okay. I think one thing we're pushing against is a lot of the traditional sources of capital really haven't been very familiar with blue tech. They probably don't have in-house, entrepreneurs in residence who are grounded in the science underlying some of these businesses. There haven't been a lot of exits, as we've discussed, so they're a little nervous about being the first to jump in. So we've been doing a lot of educating, and I think there's a lot of room for that, and it's really important to support the sector. So I would expect in 5 more years, we'll see many more players from, venture capital and other places being much more active in this space. I think we're already seeing impact investors, family offices, small funds, carving out sub-funds that are really going after this area. I expect we'll see a lot more of that. I also think, so I'm going to come back to seaweed, which has been mentioned many times today, but it's such an interesting example of what's happening in this space where you have kind of a chicken and the egg situation where you need the markets to develop in order to give farmers confidence that farming seaweed, really investing in smart, large scale farming is a good thing to do. And yet the markets are nervous to develop around a supply source that isn't guaranteed, that's still quite limited in volume. And so what we're hoping is that these things will move forward in lockstep and support each other and kind of build a fortuitous cycle of investment and new products and new markets, and that all the providers along the way will step up to like processing of crops, local kind of co-located processing of crops, including seaweed is a gap. Right now, we're looking at one company called the Crop Project that is going after that hole, and I think that's one hole. There are others, so we need all the pieces of the puzzle to develop together in order for this opportunity to become everything it has potential to be.
And can I just build off of that, which is, first of all, Donna, thank you for the sort of free advertisement for the work that I do, which is that it's important to bring new investors into this space and to educate them, and certainly want to just echo that I've seen so much more investor interest. And you see people who are interested in investing in food systems or in carbon sequestration realize that seafood and ocean should be a part of it. Don't always think of it that way. So it's really exciting to see that. But then I just also wanted to add that I think COVID has actually, while it was really harmful to the seafood industry overall, I think that it will really change the industry, hopefully for good. We've seen that having a complex global supply chain where you pull fish out of the water in the US, ship it to Asia to be processed, and then ship it back is not the most efficient. And so this idea of bringing some processing back in country, or through recirculating aquaculture, bringing the actual farming back in country and having national food security is something that have moved things forward. Direct to consumer, my understanding is really that space moved forward about 10 years due to COVID. So being able to have these smaller companies be able to take their products and bring them directly to consumers and build up that brand awareness is really exciting. So I expect to see those things really continue to build over the next 5 years.
Awesome. Greg?
Yeah, just to jump in, I mean, what I want to see in 5 years is a thriving working waterfront where the men and women who derive their livelihoods from aquaculture are thankful that the investors on this call saw the opportunity and anticipated the opportunity for investment and got busy on it. I think, at the end of the day, it is about those communities. They are the ones doing the work. So how do we come forward and really get behind them, put our shoulders against that wheel and push? So that's my vision for 5 years. We'll see. We'll check back in then.
Awesome. Oh, Joe, you're on mute.
Sorry, I had some trouble. Sorry, I know we're a little bit over time, but last 10 seconds, I would just say, a deep and diverse supply chain of players would be where I hope we would be in 5 years, where these companies just have a lot more support, both laterally and vertically.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay. In the interest of time, we're going to wrap up there. A huge thank you to the panelists. I really appreciate your candor and thoughtful discussion. And for the audience, thank you for joining. Tune back in tomorrow for day 3 of the summit. We'll kick things off at 11:30 a.m. Eastern with some remarks from the VSAT charity partner, Susu Community Forum, followed by a fireside conversation about feeding the world with Kevin Lockett from Fulcrum Global Capital and Brett Wong from Antera Capital. So thank you again to our panelists, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
everyone.